So here's a question for you. Can understanding be a one-way street? I guess this video is about empathy, but a very specific form of empathy. And an issue that doesn't just come up in narcissistic relationships, but in any relationship where there may be someone whose behavior is a problem, but they aren't aware of it entirely. So narcissism is often a leading cause of this. But we may also see this with someone who is in any kind of relationship with someone who has stuff. And this stuff may also be circumstantial. They have lots of young children and they're having to juggle all of that. They have a very difficult work situation. They're having a health issue. This stuff could be psychiatric, the patterns and symptoms associated with a mental health diagnosis, a behavioral health issue, or it could be medical, a chronic health issue. This stuff could also be historical, a history of adversity, of trauma, or of significant grief and loss. Whatever a person's stuff is, and we've all had times when we've had stuff, it can mean that that person is preoccupied or don't notice what someone else needs or wants. Now, in some cases, for example, dementia, or someone living with a head injury or an acute medical issue, or even a developmental issue, that would mean that their ability to focus on someone else is either almost impossible or completely unrealistic. We know this. We have this information, and we, as a result, may interact with them accordingly. And as a result, we and the world at large will recognize that people who are caring for people under these circumstances would need their own support. If you are in this situation, you may know how exhausting it is. You do know how exhausting it is, but may also have people who encourage you to take care of you and recognize that you are, in fact, in a one-sided situation where you need support. There are sometimes even, public programs in place, like respite programs, that involve giving people support for a day here and there so that they can care for themselves. And then there is what comes up in narcissism and with other antagonistic personalities or other cases where it may not be full-blown narcissism or antagonism, but it may be high levels of entitlement. And then a sort of manipulative willingness to turn their situation into something where they feel entitled to have things the way they want them, entitled to your time, entitled to not do anything for anyone themselves, but expect to get that back from other people. Entitlement, interestingly, can also feel like it's a part of other issues for people too. For example, we may often see entitlement as part of the picture of addiction. The struggle then becomes that you may observe that the person that you're experiencing this with had a tough backstory or is going through a difficult time and is having a spell of bad luck, and you empathize with that. And this dynamic is very pronounced in relationships that people have with vulnerably narcissistic people. This asymmetry is the core of many narcissistic relationships. One person constantly attempting to understand the other person's history, point of view, experience, mood, health, and the narcissistic person never doing that for the other person, or almost never. It's a one-way street of you trying and trying and trying to empathize and understand and make sense of their behavior and overextending yourself and doing. But you never get it back. And this is the clincher. The narcissistic person could be doing these things. They have just constructed a manipulative narrative to get them off the hook. Now, the multiplier on this is that other people, and this can even include other people such as therapists, will say, well, relationships run on compromise and understanding. So most folks in narcissistic relationships will read that as, okay, I need to be more compromising and understanding. And so you create lots of complex justifications. But these people weighing in on your relationship will almost never ask, and how is the other person in the relationship holding up their side of the relationship? And that is because you may be turning to other people for guidance because you are so exhausted. Well, you're having to turn to other people because the narcissistic person is very well taken care of in your relationship because you're taking care of them. So they aren't having to run around and ask for guidance. They may still complain about you, but they are more likely to come directly at you with their attacks. You learned long ago that not only is there no point, but that there can be some risk in doing that with a narcissistic person. So the question becomes, how long, for how long can we put the sole burden of understanding onto just one person in a relationship? Most people in narcissistic relationships are empathic and flexible to a fault. It's the only way the relationship works. But it creates an illusion that the relationship works, whatever that means, because basically one person gives up everything, the other person is content, and the person doing the giving up rationalizes it as, well, they are, fill in the blank on whatever the excuse is. And if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, the idea of reciprocity in a relationship, that doesn't even exist for you. You grew up in a world of one-way streets and had no idea that any relationship could be reciprocal and balanced. What is interesting is that many people in narcissistic relationships will say, I'm good. I'm a doer. But the part that stinks is that the narcissistic person does not notice what I'm doing for them. And they don't, nor do narcissistic people notice how much the other person in the relationship may be struggling or try to even begin to make sense of how life may be difficult for the other person in the relationship on the basis of that other person's backstory and history. For a lot of folks, the soul-crushing part of the narcissistic relationship is not the disproportionate load of having to do everything that takes a toll on them. Rather, it's the not being seen. You may be coming up with elaborate explanations for why they are always not such a great partner or family member or colleague and try to show them some grace, but that is never shown for you. You may ask for the same thing as them or make the same mistake as them, and you would be regarded with complete contempt and disdain, while when they do it, you hold space and empathy for them. How long is that sustainable for? Sadly, I have witnessed people doing this for a lifetime, but the psychological toll that it takes on you is significant. Lots of people in narcissistic relationships really get screwed because we focus on whether or not the relationship looks to be working, but never on whether both people in it are okay. And somehow, this has created a world where there are lots of relationships out there where it is one person doing the caregiving, the heavy lifting, the empathizing, the rationalizing, the supporting, and the other person just receives it all. This is why people in narcissistic relationships are exhausted, and yet they buy into a narrative that maybe this is just what relationships are. What is interesting is that many people in narcissistic family systems in particular, may have the experience of being a kid and having to cater to the narcissistic parent, and then are told that it's all about duty and obedience. And then as they get into adulthood, and they still have to cater to the narcissistic parent, and then they are told it's just respect and family. And then, as that narcissistic parent becomes elderly, they are told, well, they're old, and they're frail, and they don't know what they're doing, and they need help. because they are so old. These justifications, guilt inducers, and one-sided expectations evolve with time and keep people eternally stuck in these one-sided cycles. Breaking out of these cycles is not easy. At some level, the first step is to recognize when a relationship is asymmetric and imbalanced, and that's not easy to do. Then to go a step further and recognize that it is a one-way street, and then to ask yourself and maintain realistic expectations and recognize that they will never do this for you. And if that is the case, what does it feel like to keep being the only one who is trying to make sense of excuses for them and their inability to see what you are managing in your life? Sometimes just sitting with that can help you at least stop doing as much in the relationship. And even if you don't do as much in the relationship, stop rationalizing it. Just those small actions can help you see the relationship, uncomfortably though, much more clearly. To stop all the explaining and making sense of it. Things like they had a bad day, they had a bad childhood, they weren't taught to manage their emotions, life is hard for them. Well, most narcissistic people can show up just fine or even better than just fine when it suits them. And listen, you ain't their therapist, because at least if you were putting up with their BS, you'd be getting paid. One person can't be the only one who is always being the explainer and the understander. And at a minimum, take some of that understanding and compassion and patience that you have with them and start showing it to yourself. Thanks again.